Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Hi, it's Ian, and just before we start, I'd like to apologise. I've got a really nasty case of the flu, and my voice is a little bit croaky. But I just thought I'd say that before we get started, so please accept my apologies, and hopefully I'll be back to myself next week. Outlander is a TV show on Amazon in the Stars app where 20th century doctor Claire has time travelled back to 1766 to reunite with her 17th century husband Jamie. After a 20-year gap, they find a lot of problems with their relationships. Episode 8, First Wife, starts off with Jamie, Claire, and wee Ian riding back to the Fraser family home of Lallybroch, each of them with a wee bit of apprehension for their own reasons. Now, sure enough, Jenny is both pleased to see Claire, but that's undercut with some bitterness, and Ian seems to be feeling the same. And this leads to some recriminations as Jenny's cross with Jamie about Ian helping with his smuggling, and Jamie knows that they've been happy to take the money that he's been sending, and everybody seems to be cross at Claire for not writing or dropping in for a cup of tea for 20 years. So, they put Ian to work wiping poo and muck on a fence or something, and he gets laughed at by his wee sister, and they think that's good punishment and better than him being, beaten with a stick or something. Then they talk over about the same things that were covered in the first couple of scenes for about 5 minutes. Seriously, 3 or 4 scenes of that. And then that night, Claire opens up to Jamie about how she hates being disliked by Jenny and not feeling like part of the family anymore. And she really wants to tell her the truth, but Jamie naysays that as Jenny's not really that sort of open-minded and worldly as Murtagh or maybe like, say, the priest out of the first series. And then Jamie tells the story of the missing plotline from episode 3 and how he found a hidden box of Mackenzie jewels on a wee island, explaining kind of why that episode felt a bit jumpy and odd. And then just as everything starts getting romantic-y, 2 wee random kids burst in and start calling Jamie Daddy. And then Leary pops in, and she's all sort of angry and freaked out that Claire's there, shouting that Jamie's her husband now and that Claire's some kind of witch. And obviously that leaves Claire kind of shell-shocked, and Jamie goes downstairs to chat to the wee girl and tells her that he'll never abandon her or her sister and that he does love them, but that Claire's his true companion in love, not their mum. Now, after being confronted with that kind of shock, Claire's obviously naturally just about ready to get out of Dodge, and Jamie has to do a little bit of firefighting to fix this domestic shambles that he finds himself in. And he points out that he only married Leary a couple of years ago, so obviously neither of his children are actually his. But then all the repressed stuff starts coming to the surface as Jamie lets rip about he's all kind of hurt and furious about how he imagines that Claire's been living man and wife with Frank for years raising his child, and how dare she judge him for wanting some happiness, while Claire's like seething that he could marry women who tried to have him burned at the stake. Now, all this kind of awkwardness then turns into a slightly rapey sex scene that, well, I mean, it gets consensual, but only after a while, and just at that point, Jenny comes in and puts a stop to all the silliness, because it's the middle of the night and people need to sleep, so go Team Jenny. The next day, Jamie tries to convince Claire to stay at the front gate, and it's kind of going okay, and then a bit badly, and then luckily, Leary tearfully interrupts them and starts waving around a gun that's frankly bigger than she is, and then she accidentally shoots Jamie mid-sentence, and Claire pushes her away and does a kind of surgery on Jamie with wee Ian assisting. And during his recovery, Jamie tells her about all of this stuff coming to pass. And it turns out that Leary's kids got him dancing and happy at Hogmanay one year when he was being a bit sore-faced and, lonely. And then, encouraged by Jenny, he ended up getting together with a twice-widowed Leary, more to be a dad to her kids than because he actually really wanted to be with her. But then the marriage ended up failing because Leary, as it transpires, is not only a bit, grumpy and stroppy, but she had a terrible marriage to one of her husbands who, it sounds like, maybe beat her, raped her or something. It's not very clear. But anyway, Jamie couldn't really stand to be with somebody who looked at him in terror every time they went to bed. Now, and Jenny and Claire finally get a bit of a catch-up, and they seem to be able to reach some kind of resolution. But a bit, Jenny knows that Claire's been lying, but she kind of accepts that maybe that's how it has to be. And then Ned Gowan turns up, and he tells everyone that although the marriage is legally binding, Jamie will need to make amends to the church because he got remarried when his wife was still alive, even if he didn't know. And then also Leary's going to need all kinds of crazy alimony from him. And of course, Jamie knows that actually this is going to be okay because he's still got that secret stash of jewels hidden on Silky Island. So of course, he knows that he has to head over there, and he'll have to swim out to the island. So he takes Claire with him and wee Ian, since wee Ian can swim really well. And of course, Jamie's got a short arm. And while they're out there, and Ian's having his duke in the water, Jamie and Claire have a bit of a calm and sensible chat and try to figure out if they can make all this work. But before Claire can finally make a decision, a pirate ship scoots around the island and they have a wee boat, so they've actually managed to kidnap wee Ian, leaving Jamie and Claire on the beach with no jewels and no nephew and desperately having to make a rescue mission. So what did I think?
Well, I think there's an awful lot that we can take from this episode, most of it very emotional or complicated. I mean, it was a lovely return both to Lallybroch and to see a load of familiar faces. I mean, talking about Lallybroch, it was great going back there. Although there was something a bit weird about the first shot of it. I mean, maybe it was a CGI or something because it is a kind of rundown building in real life. But anyway, it was really lovely to go there and to see Ian and Jenny again. I mean, no matter how frosty the reception is, Ian and Jenny are kind of a strange wee world unto themselves in Outlander. I mean, it could be largely due to the really good acting by Laura Donnelly and Stephen Cree. I mean, they bring a proper gravity to the show. And seriously, whenever Ian and Jenny have been on the show, have they ever been anything but sensible? I mean, they're kind of like an anchor to the madness of everything that happens in Jamie and Claire's existence, and they ground the story all through seasons 1 and 2 every time they appear. And now, 20 years on, it's really interesting to see that Jenny has more or less had enough of Jamie's nonsense by this point. She's really kind of over him, all of his crazy adventures and things. And moreover, the Murrays have kind of understandable reasons for the fact that they're kind of cross with Claire. I mean, from as far as they know, from their point of view, Claire vanished 20 years earlier, and by all rights should have just gone to them after Culloden and everything if she was still alive. But at the very least, if she didn't do that, she should have written or just dropped in for a cup of tea or something. But she never did. She just forgot them, or at least that's what it seems to them. And there's a real hurt in them that feels like it needs addressed. As well as that, there was the brief returns of Bill Patterson and Nell Hudson, and the now almost geriatric-looking Ned Gowan was wonderfully nice to see. I mean, the way he just sort of shuffles in and he gets a wee bit weepy seeing Claire, but then like a typical lawyer, he gets right down to business as soon as they start talking about it, and that was really nice. And it was good to see him again, because to be honest, I wasn't even sure if he'd actually survived the witch trial because he sort of got pulled over the side and it looked like someone hit him or something, and then you never heard about him again until about last week. Similarly, Nell Hudson turning up as Leary was nice, but I'll talk a wee bit more about that later. There was also something really nice about getting out into Lallybroch as a place, as a sort of working farm, because it shows you that while things might have been strange and there was turmoil and everything, life has actually been going on. And while Jamie and Claire have the kind of wee worlds of strange turmoil, everyone else has been living, and the world hasn't exactly turned to rack and ruin. But speaking about Jamie and Claire, I also like that there's a very serious amount of emotion at work here, and I've mentioned this previously in previous episodes, that there's definitely a huge amount of recrimination and anger on both sides, and they really need to work through their issues and get the pain out in the open, and they've got a lot of work to do in that regard. I think some of it's being really nicely done, and it's being portrayed well, but there is an issue, and this is where we get into the bad. Now, Outlander is a show where conflict pops up a lot, and there have been a few periods where the characters have been allowed to just chill out and enjoy life for a wee while, but that generally isn't the case, and it's certainly not the case here. And now I know that it helps to drive the story, but considering that Claire arrived home and then after a lot of rolling around in the hay with her and Jamie, they've actually had very little time to chat because every time they try and talk about something sensible, someone ends up interrupting them. I mean, last week it was people constantly knocking on the door, and then including suddenly they were having a chat, and then the print fire went on shop, and they had to rush off and save them that. And then this week they get interrupted by children, and then by Leary rushing in, and then Jenny throwing a bucket of water at them, and then Leary putting a gun on them later, and then pirates kidnapping Wee Ian. Now, maybe it's just me, but this kind of smacks of a writer or writers deliberately dragging out some conversations and plot things so that they don't have resolution, so that you either have to watch a later scene or an episode to actually find out what the resolution is. I mean, it might be that this is exactly what happens in the book, or maybe not, I'm not sure. But I couldn't believe that this exact same thing happened over and over and over again in the episode. I just felt it was a bit lazy and kind of convoluted to have this keep happening, and it felt a wee bit contrived. Another aspect that I felt let down on was Leary, or rather, the complete lack of Leary in the episode. Now, I've always thought that Leary was an interesting character in the show. I mean, in the first book, not so much, because I did read the first book, but in the TV show, more so than in the book. I mean, even though she was kind of a silly teenager who was always had moon eyes for Jamie, she was an interesting person, and she did have a sly, slightly evil streak to her. But this week we get reintroduced to her, and she's no longer a teenager. She might, still be very naive and silly, but she's a woman now in her mid-30s. She's been widowed twice, and she has two lovely wee daughters who she's brought up, and they seem to be really sweet and kind. And then we find out that her and Jamie are married, and that Jenny encouraged Jamie to do it, and frankly, Jamie was so besotted with the girls and the idea of daddyhood that he decided to marry this lassie who used to always fancy him. Now, what fascinated me about that is when he goes on to describe that how she acted really strangely, and it sounds like she's had some kind of really serious trauma. I mean, the plot seems to be hinting here that she was the survivor of like one or two maybe horribly abusive marriages where she was like violently and possibly sexually abused by her husband. Now, I've no idea if that means that she's going to show up again next week. I mean, the preview kind of suggests that maybe she won't, but I mean, considering the weight of that kind of storyline, I feel that should have been something that they've gave a little more time and attention to, and maybe a little bit more care. I mean, certainly, possibly even from Claire's point of view, because she surely should have a little sympathy there, even if she doesn't like Leary, because Leary, tried to have her burned at the stake and all this stuff. Now, of course, I mean, I'm saying that as a show watcher more than a book reader, and I know the book readers get a wee bit cross sometimes, because the book gives everything a slightly different look, mainly because it's from Claire's point of view, and that she hates Leary. So maybe all this stuff got skipped over in the book because she just didn't want to know about it. But it feels kind of offhand to drop a character bomb like that when reintroducing Leary, and then having her just run off again, where they've gone to all the effort of getting like Nell Hudson to come back and play the character, and then we've seen her for literally 2 seconds, and she's had about 3 lines in the whole episode, and most of them were like, "Oh no, he's my husband," and "Oh no, you're a witch, Claire, and I'm shoot you now." But I mean, considering the stramash that people go over things like changes to stuff like that tiny bit of the print scene that Jamie not crying and stuff, I'm sure fans might go a bit mental if they, quote unquote, wasted time showing Leary and actually giving her a personality and a bit of a story arc. But I don't know. I mean, I think you can't really open up something like that and not pay it any credence and attention. And not if you want to make a modern kind of feminist-looking TV show. You can't just gloss over, aspects of like domestic violence and stuff. And I don't want to come over all politically motivated on this and stuff, but I do think that's important. And anyway, getting back to more cheerful and sensible things, on a weird final note, and this really bugged me. When they went to the island at the end, why couldn't they get a boat? Ian and Jenny, they've got a cart. Surely they could have like put a rowboat in it. Maybe have a rowboat out in the farm somewhere. And if you're going all the way off to this Silky Island, wherever it happens to be, there must be some fishermen nearby or some farming and fishing communities. Surely they know they're going to go out there to pick up loads of cash. Couldn't they have just spent a couple of pence and hired a local rowboat off of a fisherman or something like that? I don't know. That just seemed a bit strange to me and a bit necessary to, rather than having them all go off to the island, just have Ian go by himself. I mean, it made sense Jamie swimming out there at first because he was an escaped prisoner and there was no way of him doing it otherwise. But, this is Jamie, Claire, and wee Ian going along with plenty of time to prepare and sort themselves out. Now, it just struck me as a bit silly. Anyway, but still, the story's been moving along, and we've now got the impotence for them to become the voyagers that the book is titled after. So next week is going to be something to do with ships and pirate fun and things like that. So until then, I've been a very ill Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. I'll see you all next week, assuming I don't keel over and die. Anyway, I'm off to my bed. Night night.